Welcome back to another episode of Have You Heard? Today, Adam wants another introduction, but I'm not going to give it to him. It's Adam joining me today, and we want to talk all about social, as this podcast is always about, and specifically around how to differentiate your brand in a crowded market on social. Obviously, you know, everyone has competitors in the market. We do, our clients do, every brand out there does. But I think what would be great to talk about, is how do brands and how would you advise brands to really set themselves apart in the market and build differentiation as a part of what they do, and really, I guess, build that sort of cult following with that as well. What's the sort of like first step you would take a brand on looking to sort of develop that?
So I think I've got some notes here, but the first thing, and trying to distill it down, is basically just knowing the platforms. We are very fortunate that there is, 40 odd people within this building that live and breathe, TikToks, Instagrams, YouTubes. I know you're a big fan of YouTube and the different aspects of it. And I think that's a great example as well of, what you watch on YouTube is very different to maybe what I watch on YouTube. And the same with the variety of people in this building of using platforms and everyone across, the social sphere. But the principle of it and what's so valuable to us and the execution of our strategies and where to start is just immersing in those platforms. And that's not just from like a general use it, that's the start point. Get on there, use it, understand it, get a feel for it. That's going to give you your best indication of how it works, how it feels comfortable. But also it's going to very much give you a real quality insight into what content exists, the good stuff, the bad stuff. It will certainly open your eyes to different ways of filming content. I think one of the big things over time is, that we always look at, and I know Zoe's a big advocate of this as well, is when you think about best practice, and we talk about best practice, but also not necessarily always following best practice. It's a guideline. And actually those people who really understand the platform are the ones that are finding the innovative ways and innovating in the space very much.
Setting the practice,
exactly.
Future practices,
And I think, but that's because they understand the platform. And, it's also not just about seeing what's good and bad, like from your competitor set as well. It's like just in general, like what content exists. TikTok is ever so close now to Google and YouTube in touch with being a search engine. Put any topic, any word into TikTok feed. I mean, maybe be careful in some things, but there's going to come up a list of content types, and certainly within niches of content or within different content brackets. If you go really broad, something like travel, there's probably going to be 200-300 different ways in which people are telling their travel story, which is going to give you an idea of what's good and bad, but also might inspire you and how you might tell your story. But also you could very much put in something like feet, and feet is also going to give you a real breadth of content, potentially from, the more focused in terms of what physiotherapy or runners, in those kind of communities, right the way through to your more probably fetish groups and things like that. But again, how that content is produced and what people are talking about is certainly going to give you a massive indication as to what kind of content, how you want to play in the space, and certainly how audiences are using it. So it's all, for me, it's always the biggest one, and it's the biggest thing we reiterate. Like I say, very fortunate to have a team that live and breathe these social channels. It's just about using it. Like step one is just get in there, whatever age level you are. If you're trying to do it, really understand what the platform is and how it works, and what kind of content is being produced, because like I say, it's so varied for one category, but people are using it in so many amazing creative ways. They might not all be right for you, but certainly it's going to give you an indication as to what you could and potentially how you might execute in the platform, just from that base understanding.
Do you think, like, playing it safe, you can still differentiate yourself by playing it safe? Or is it okay? I think it's when we speak with brands, we almost want to understand how far on the sort of spectrum they're willing to push that creativity and, play social first and platform specific. Obviously, some want to lean more on the safer side and have those brand guidelines that may restrict them in certain circumstances. But do you think that has an indication of like how far someone can differentiate themselves, or is there other factors, I guess, that enable a brand to sort of differentiate themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it depends absolutely how far you want to take it, right? Like platforms will have. So let's address like the first part of like if you play it safe. If you are, let's say, a fashion, for example, you can be a big fashion house, you can be a boutique fashion outlet with one store, whatever it is. The essence of that is you've probably got similar products and the same stories to tell. And for the vast majority of it, you're probably always going to fall into a category of telling your story in a similar way, right? Like there's certain nuances. It's summer, here's what to wear for this or that. Like there's certain content, themes, pillars, stories that are resonant and relevant to every single fashion brand across, similar to if it was a car. We've got 4 wheels, we've got a steering wheel, we've got like, there's stuff which is just, almost generic or the same across the board. So you have every right to tell those stories. There's also, certain aspects of storytelling, which again is going to be slight nuance and slightly different, but the core of it is still going to be tapping into persona moments, whatever that may be. The variant in that, is, and the question to the latter part of what you're saying, I suppose, is how do you tell the same story but be different, and how do you push the boundaries? You don't have to. You can look at it and just find the same route the same way if it works, and you're probably going to end up getting fairly decent views and people will watch it and see your content, and you might do quite well, and that's fine depending on what your audience is. The opportunity, however, is to look at it from a perspective of, okay, how do you bring in colours, your brand colors? How do you do a trend slightly different? How do you tell that story slightly different? And that may not necessarily be in the direct sort of talking point or issue or relevancy of what you're saying. Here's 5 things to wear to a wedding this year. It might be in the way it's shot. And you're bringing a creative nuance to that. Now, it might break the norm of what traditionally might exist, but that in itself is being quite brave, because you're going, okay, I'm going to own this style. I'm going to own something. I'm going to tell the story, but I'm going to bring my way to it. Now that comes with pros and cons. The pros of it are you're doing something different and it's so much more ownable. The cons are it might not necessarily feel relevant to,
or it's untested, I guess,
or completely untested. But at the same time, it goes back to my point earlier, and the thing we always say is best practice comes from people testing and finding things that work. If you're just doing best practice that exists now, you're always going to be in the same category as everyone else. So unless you're trying or looking at unique ways of building your uniqueness into that, and the way it's filmed, or what your take is on it, and how you bring personality to something, that's is very much comes down to what people are willing to do, how far they're willing to push it. But without testing, you can have a very solid, very good, space social ecosystem, but is it the best you could do? You'll never know unless you try something. So the being bold and being brave 100% is the questions. I think a really good example for us is the work that we've done on with Merlin. Recent win. I think when you get a client like that, certainly working with Dungeons and Sea Life, the initial sense is, what do you do? It's do animals and actors. Like, how do you sell that kind of thing? And it could be pretty generic in its execution of just, come down, a day in the life of a zookeeper or whatever, which is in itself perfectly acceptable content to do. But when you start looking, and if you don't already, check it out, look at the Sea Life and London Dungeons channels, we've found a way to tap into really relevant audience consumer moments through like Love Island with a load of actors in dungeons. We found a way to execute a really unique approach to trends. Who would you rather's, or who does it better, whatever it may be. A day in the life of a I think the one the other day was a day in the life of an otter. They're executions of what like content creators or influencers are doing, and we're taking that and putting it into actually a really brave space rather than it being about the person or the zookeeper. It's a fun take on things. That is being bold and brave to an extent. But also there's a real beautiful ownability to that content because, they're both shot very differently, but, Dungeons feels, every piece of content that comes out of there feels like a mini soap.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love it because it's just so unique to them.
Yeah. And I think with the content production, the ideas and everything that you come up with on social, it really you shouldn't be thinking, I want to appeal to everyone.
No.
Like in any form of marketing, you want to appeal to many, but not all really. Some people are going to not laugh. They're not going to find it funny. It's not going to be relatable to them. But if you're, as long as you're nailing that other sort of bigger piece, then and attracting some, you can't be just like almost down the middle of the road. You almost have to take that stance and bring that own story, personality through content.
Yeah. And I think that comes from, again, like understanding your pillars, the role, what you're trying to do, the messaging, all of those things, who you're trying to attract.
Yeah.
And once you get that, I think then a great example, not a client of ours, but the STEM, I think, is a wonderful TikTok feed. Vicky, who does, I think she still does the marketing there. I remember listening to her do a talk once, and she was very much saying it's not about mass audience because they're for people who love houseplants. Yeah. So she was like, we don't look necessarily at our follower count. We don't necessarily look at the number of views, because the number of views on their content, certainly on TikTok, is never going to be huge because not everybody has houseplants or is interested in that sector. Yeah. So they create very educational, very very relevant content to houseplant owners. Yeah. And what they often look at is the engagement, people, the saves, because the big numbers aren't, like I say, important to them. And I think they've just nailed the fact that they know their audience. They have a core metric system and a measurement of success, but also they've got a really great, and it's not even, I wouldn't even say, and with all due respect, it's like anything unique or different, but they've just got a super clear style and they leverage the platform to its best of its ability with, text to speak, with the way it's shot, with their brand colors. Everything they do just feels so native, but it's so obviously them because it's just pure education. Yeah. How you look after this plant. Did you know this? Best type of plant for this. It's perfect. It's like such a wonderful example of, for them, I'm sure if they did get to like 10, 15 million, great, let's pat each other on the back. But in reality, it's not reflective of, it's not reflective of what the houseplant audience is. So and
you could alienate some of that audience by shifting a content
absolutely,
strategy to try and be for all rather than for them as well.
And I think that's where, a prime example of brands just getting everything across the board, like just really being comfortable with who they are, who they're for. And then execution becomes so simple in a way. You just know what you're doing and it's very clear. And I think, so many brands, that jump into these spaces, it's what are our competitors doing? We just want to do that. And then straight away you're just lost in, you're not different at all.
You're chasing.
Exactly. And it's, literally having the conversation again today, about some of the content we do for Uniqlo. And I was looking across the board and I was like, some of that stuff is amazing. So, and I think over the year we've really identified, and the team that work on it, a very clear look and feel. And we've got 2 wonderfully different strategies for Instagram and TikTok. Mm-hmm. I was generally just having a look. There's a couple of videos on there, like 1 million plus views, organic views. They look, sometimes some of them are just so different to what we would normally produce, but they're leveraging a trending moment. Mm-hmm. But the context of what the brand is trying to do is all the same across the board all the time. We've just flipped the style to tap into a trending sound or voice, or done something reactive. And then at the same time, you've also got some beautifully shot content, which hits hundreds and thousands of views. Mm-hmm. And then across the board, you've got some pretty, the great results, but they're pretty consistent. Mm-hmm. And so even that, when you look at it, of what you're trying to do, is the value is what we found is a consistency and a look and feel. And actually, I'm far more excited by the fact that week in, week out, the pieces of content are growing slowly, but very consistent, because it tells me that we're talking to an audience that really like the content. Yeah. And then every now and again, we get a moment where you're okay, that shifted the dial. What have we learned from that? What works? We're not chasing the millions all the time, because I think you'll get lost. It's just chasing the fact that the brand looks like a brand. Mm-hmm. When you put that content against other brands, it's very obvious who it is. And that, again, is just understanding, being comfortable with, right? We know what we're trying to do. We know the platform. We've got our creative nuance in there and how we might play around with color or whatever it may be. And we know who we're talking to.
Yeah.
That's the core values within that.
Well, that seems like a lovely place.
Yes, hopefully.
To wrap up with. But yes, thank you for joining us in our new podcast studio. Nice. New sofa coming soon, as I probably already mentioned, another one, and many more to come. So thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe.